Okay, Roy, you do this every day. You've done this for 97 days in a row. Now what?
Day 97, we've been building up to big guests on This Is Not Advice. We are answering your questions about work, and today we have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce you to our guest, who is part of a very secret cabal from his college newspaper that has many, many, many of the great founders in it, then was a software engineer, became a venture capitalist. When we started Bloomberg Beta and I asked some of the founders who I most respected, also some of the nerdiest founders I respected, who is the person on Sand Hill Road who is at a big firm, who is not quite yet the full partner at that firm, who is your favorite investor? The plurality answer was James Cham, who is now my equal partner in Bloomberg Beta. And this is a subject about which we both have, so we're just gonna dive in, and we're gonna do this a lot of times, about which we both have different views, which is what's the way to figure out how do I do as little work as possible to figure out if my startup is a good idea?
Well, I mean, as you know, I am a sucker for the good idea, right? I'm a sucker for the angle. I love like the founder who has a unique way of understanding the world and takes a different perspective than the one that I think everyone
else. Like I could meet a pizza shop founder who has like a really good pizza shop they want to start and get hot for that.
Right. I mean, and I think obviously execution is really important. Yeah. But the question of like sort of what is the, I don't know, what's the word, like what is the MVP or what is the smallest amount of work?
The lean startup idea is kind of out there around a minimum viable product. And so now that that's been floating out there, what's the way that you, when you see a founder, apply it to their specific circumstances?
So I think the really important thing is that a startup is not just a product, it's not just an idea, it's a fiction created by a set of people, right? And I think like the social angle of trying to put together your startup or the thing you're trying to create is the thing that mostly because VCs are so aspy or on the spectrum, we ignore too often, right? And but that dynamic of who you're
like customers wanting your thing, do you mean
the whole thing, the whole ecosystem, who you're working, like critically, who are you actually working with? Right? Who are you do you like selling to these types of people? Do you like the people who you might have to hire? And all those sorts of questions, I feel like that is the piece of learning that is so often underestimated and undervalued as people talk about like the next big thing they're trying to build.
Are there examples that come up for you? Because the one that comes up for me as you say that is I remember there was a company that we passed on that came back like 2 months later at a much higher price. And they made all this progress. I was like, how did you guys make so much progress so fast? And they said, easy. We just started with all the stuff we didn't know if we can do. And I think that we are such, like in the startup world, we often fetishize founders, like particular strength. If it's a design-oriented founder, you want to see like the most beautifully designed thing in the world. And, I was just looking at the first site for Airbnb, like arguably some of the most design-oriented successful founders. That thing looked like shit. And by the way, that's an asset, which is they worked first on the stuff that they didn't know if they could do, which is creating supply and demand. I don't know if they thought of it that way. But I don't know, I'm curious, are there examples where you're like, this is the right way to do it that come up for you?
I mean, sort of all of the, I mean, I don't know, you think about the Dropcam guys, right? And you think about the way that they just thought about it. They had like a really clear angle.
You're an investor in them, right?
And so you think about the way that like Greg and Amir thought about it, they were on the one hand such a mess because it's early, no one really understood anything. But on the other hand, they took just the right smart shortcuts, right? And they built that small thing that proved out like sort of that their angle, which to be honest, like the clever angle was that they had a different way of making webcams connect, right? And it was like so clever and it made such a big difference.
Totally.
I think that in part because I am a sucker for the insight, right? Like, sort of what's that small thing you can do to build that insight, but also critically, as you're thinking about this idea, like who are you doing this with, right? And do you really want to do it with them? To me, like that's like the,
yeah. I mean, there's all these parts where I feel like people start working on something and they convince themselves that some aspect of it is the right thing to do. A classic example is technical founders who have a thing that requires enterprise sales. And then it's like, they just learn, actually, I don't want to be selling things to enterprises. I don't want to take CIOs out for steak dinners, or at least pre-COVID. And the thing that comes up
and there's a little bit of this thing where, sort of I think the beautiful thing about startups and about founders is, it is fundamentally about them imposing their will on the universe right? And then, so to a certain extent, like on the one hand, you'd want to be lazy and like sort of figure out as quickly as possible. But on the other hand, you just got to figure out, like, do you want to do this and do you want to devote yourself to it? And so it's as much about customers as it is about you, right?
Totally. And so figuring out whether it's viable for you, personally viable product. Maybe
right.
The other thing that comes up for me around this is there is a paradox in you want something that is extraordinary feeling to somebody with as little work as possible. And I kind of think of like, I took 2 Aikido classes, and it's like the practice of wastelessness in your motions feels like what the great founders do. And then my last thing on this, which I've written about a little bit, is, as you know, which is the idea in the lean startup of a minimally viable product was sort of about a throwaway to test some aspect of a hypothesis, as opposed to the first crappy version of your product. There's a concept that I find related but different and useful of the first useful thing. When are you going to get to the point of building something that some customer is like, user, whatever, is like, this is good enough that I want this. I prefer using it to my alternatives. And like, I love when we get pitched things that are totally busted and janky, but a bunch of the people using it adore it because it just does that thing, because you can fix all that stuff over time. So
that's right. That willingness to incur technical debt or just a bunch of different kinds of debt, I think is a critical characteristic of the best startups, because
it's not enthusiasm debt, meaning you have to be excited about it. And Julie Ehrman, my co-founder, had this great definition of success, which is if every day or every week you're more excited about it than you were the week before, you're succeeding. And it's so simple sounding, but like ultimately the battery pack that fuels companies is founder enthusiasm. So I think what I'm hearing is, yeah, do the lean startup MVP, but make sure it's personally viable to you. Make sure you know the difference between whether you're doing something to test or something useful, and make sure that you have an insight about the thing that is going to be wildly exciting to the customer, because even if you cut a ton of corners, you can't cut that corner because that's the whole value.
Right. And then the thing that's interesting and different now is, sort of there are a bunch of arbitrages out there in terms of things that seem hard that are actually now easy. Right. And there's a way in which you go to a customer, like it doesn't matter whether it was really hard. It just only matters whether the customer is like impressed and thinks that, oh, this is amazing. This solves my problem. I was just talking to a friend of mine who, sort of has been going around pitching this thing. And, in the old days, maybe he'd have a conversation or maybe he'd show a PowerPoint. And now he shows like, sort of something that looks like an application. Under the hood, it's like Google spreadsheet, but because he's figured out exactly how to talk about it and answer the problem and repitch it in a way that like his customer base understands, right? Then that's like,
and look, what the code startup, my dream is the $1 billion no employee startup that isn't about patent theft. That's like, we saw OnDeck launch their no code fellowship today. What you do with no code used to be CRUD applications in the browser. And soon what you can do with no code, I mean, look, we've got a whole like political movement to get out the vote that's effectively a no code project. And so you can do lots of cool things. And as AI tools get more available, it's just going to be so fun to ride that way.
How has that changed, doing Walk the Vote? How has that changed the way that you think about what building a product or building a thing looks like today?
It has reminded, in many ways, I'm going to write something about it, but the big one is it's reminded me that if you, as a builder of new things, have mastery over the settings, and what I mean by that is when you use products like Gmail, how much mastery do you have over the settings? When you use products like Airtable, how much mastery do you have over the settings? You can get a lot of leverage just by being a pro user of those products that are out there that kind of most people kind of know how to use, but they don't really know how to use them. And if you really know how to use them, you can go very, very fast.
Right. I mean, it is, it's amazing. It's amazing. So
free trials, use the free trials for everything. Something I learned from my friend Jason Motto, saying, it's like we almost have this calendar of as we approach it, it's like, okay, we're 30 days away. Now there's all these products we can use. 14 days away. Now there's even more products we can use because we just use all the free trials. Like cascading, expanding circle of products we can use. But that'll be a subject for another day. Gonna wrap.
Okay, do we answer the question, Roy?
No, but we started to. And that's what we're trying to do here. And we certainly did not give anyone any advice, least of all you.
There you go. Take